Hello, my friends. Welcome to IT Tidbits. It's Ron here, and today I'm kicking off a series on using Windows PowerShell in an Active Directory environment. In my job, I use PowerShell daily to gather data, push settings, and manage general desktop issues. PowerShell has been around for several years now, and for me, it's become that tool in the chest that always does the job from start to finish. In the past, I've used Windows and DOS batch files, I've used AutoIT, I've used Kickstart, and I've even used VBS scripts, but they never seem to get me all the way to the finish line. PowerShell is that one tool I've found that does that for me, and I think that's because Microsoft finally got smart and they demanded the programmers write every interface on top of PowerShell. This pushed the programmers to take the code to that last 20% that always seemed to be missing for me. I could get so far, but I just couldn't get to the end of that line. Today, I'm just going to start us off with a few basics of how I set up my scripts and how I set up the interface to get me rolling. And the first thing I do is I'm going to launch Windows PowerShell, but I'm going to launch the ISE. Now, I always use the ISE. A lot of people like to work from the command prompt, but I like this because I got the best of both worlds. If I'm testing a command and I want to save that command, I can quickly drop it up in the top pane where I can put the code, or I can test a command down below. It just gives me the best of both worlds, and I enjoy having that available to me. One thing I always do when I launch the ISE, I launch it as administrator. If I'm going to write the code, if I've got a job to do and I need the script to run, it's going to have to run as administrator for me to gather anything meaningful as I'm remoting other PCs or testing code on my own computer. So I launch it as admin, and I just get in the habit of doing that. The next thing I always try to do, maybe once a week, not every day, but I just quickly do an update help. I do rely on the help files quite a bit. This is another one of those things that Microsoft really went all out and had everyone develop this help file system. Sometimes you'll get this failed to update help when it's done. There are some modules it can't find updates for or can't use. Sometimes I write my own modules, so these could also be ones that are failing on. Another thing I like to do is immediately go into Tools, Options, and kick my font up to about size 12. Lucida Console is a good one to use, but the thing you'll know right away is it's hard to, in some of those smaller font lines, to tell the difference between a parentheses and a end bracket. When I'm making a script, I have a few things that I always do. Number one, I always put the clear command at the top. I hate when I run a script and the old code from the last run or the last thing I did is still down here in the window. I like to start off and kick it off with a nice clear open window so I can see the code running and just get the data back. This is really helpful for me because I have to gather a lot of data and put it in reports to send to someone else. So I like to have a nice clear window to start with. The next thing I do is I will always set the error action variable, and I like to set it to silently continue. Again, this is one of those things. As my script is running, these red errors on the screen, I don't like to see those in the final product. So I'll put this up here and set it to silently continue. And then as if I want to see errors as I'm trying to troubleshoot the script or issues, I can just quickly pound that out, and then it will show me the red errors, show me the issues. The next thing I do in my script is set the data set or the items I'm running the actions against into a variable or array. Here I'm using a copied command I use a lot of the time, and since most of my work is done against computers, I've set my variable to $computers. I've created the command to gather the computers that I want, so I'm using getAdComputer, and I've filtered on the name of the computers that start with ABC, and I've also set my search base to be at the root of my domain. I like to add these next two lines to verify I'm getting data in my array. The first one is simply an echo of the computer's array. This will show me the type of data that's in the array. And the second command gives me an item count of the array, which will show me how many items I picked up. The count is nice because if I'm expecting to get 500 computers and I only see 10, it quickly alerts me there could be a problem with the way I'm gathering the data. And again, these can be left in or pounded out depending on what I want the data to look like. I have two types of scripts that I can go into from here. The first one is just your basic for loop. So I can say for each computer in computers, do something. And maybe I want to remote that computer. So the thing I like to do is I like to set up a variable for the remote session. So I'll do $s for session, and I'll say new PS session, and the computer name. In my world, DNS is heavily relied on. It is an Active Directory environment, and DNS is a big piece of that. So I always like to start my new session with the DNS host name. From there, I can then do an invoke-command to that new session and drop that action into a script block. Now, you see, well, we're starting to get these multiple endpoints down here, these end brackets. This is where you got to do your commenting. You do a lot of loops and script blocks. You're going to want to put a comment on the end of those, just so when you're trying to tab and format and get this all lined up, it's nice to have it marked like that so you know what you're doing. I just want to have it echo the computer name. This is always nice to have so you know you've actually connected to something. If you echo back an environmental computer name, this comes off the local computer in the session. You know you've attached to it. Set the location to C: Windows, and then I want to do a directory. So this is my basic for next loop to go through some action. I've got the computers, that's my data I work on. I go through each entry in the array, make a connection, do something, end that. Now the thing you got to remember if you're doing these PowerShell remote sessions, you got to end that at the end. So I'll do a remove PS session $s just before I end the for each loop. That'll give us a nice little cleanup, and it'll save that memory. Sometimes I could be connecting up upwards of thousands of computers, and that'll really suck up memory quickly on your computer. Now this kind of script is just a basic loop. We loop through each computer one at a time. This is what I use when I'm trying to gather data. I like to keep the data I found in line with the name of the computer. As I have the computer name here, then I'll do the action and get the data, the directory listings, for instance, right under that, and then we'll go to the next computer. Sometimes just to keep things nice and neat, I'll even do a write host with a couple of quotes. That'll just create a new line, and then it'll go to the next loop. So it gives me a nice formatted block of data for each computer that I'm getting stuff from. Sometimes, though, I just need to hit a bunch of computers fast and furious, and that's when I like to change this to what I call a blaster script. I comment out my session, and I comment out my loops. I'm not going to do a for each. I'm just going to get my computers, I'm going to do an action on them, and then I'm going to dump out that data. So in this case, I would change the $s, which is my new PS session variable. I'll change that to do a computer name and push the whole array into that. So this script is going to run much faster. It's going to blast it out to multiple computers at a time and just keep going until it gets through the list. And this is if I've got an emergency where I need to do a quick change. We need to push this reg key out quickly. I'll do this to hit those as quick as I can. Now one other thing, this is my basic format for everything I do. I'll usually start with this script and either do a blaster script or a for next loop script. When you're working as admin and you're working live, if you're doing a command that you're unsure of, maybe you want to remove an item and you want it to come out of the Windows directory. These are very powerful commands, very dangerous things. I always like to do a what if the first time through. Anytime you're working on live data and production environment, put what ifs in front of your commands and run through once, let it connect to a few machines, and let it echo back to you what it's doing so you can make sure you're in the right directory, working on the right file. There's nothing worse than deleting a bunch of stuff out of the Windows directory when you meant to just delete a log file. So that's it, just a real quick down and dirty format. I'll get into this a little deeper, and we'll do some things with this script, but I wanted to show you just my basic script that I need to do some work on a block of items with. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you heard or you want to hear more, make comments below, ask me for things you'd like to see. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.